Well, hello there, everyone. It is Dr. Siobhan Farad here, host of the Made Marriage Show, where you all know by now that is the show where I interview incredible and amazing wives to learn how they make marriage work. So I'm actually coming to you today with a special edition episode that's a little bit of a deviation from what I normally do on this show. And I thought I would give you sort of a peek into my own marriage and how I make make my marriage work. And so I wanted to come on and do this episode today because yesterday my husband and I celebrated our 6th year of marriage. And I thought I would come on briefly and just share with you sort of 6 lessons that I've learned over this time of being married, in combination with actually being a marriage and relationship coach. So I have an interesting vantage point, right, where I live many of the experiences that I get the opportunity to coach my clients through, as well as seeing it from a professional standpoint of knowing, intellectually what should be happening, knowing from all the research that I've read and all of the studies that I know about for what are the things that make marriage work. And so it's sort of, I get this unique opportunity to have sort of the rubber meet the road in terms of my own experiences, given what I know from my educational background and what I live in my own marriage. So I wanted to just come on really briefly, since we're in the space of coming to this page around this time, to talk about how to make marriage work and share with you 6 lessons that I've been learning and applying personally over the course of being married to my husband. So I have notes, because I always have notes. And if this is your first time joining me and you're like, what is this? I am Dr. Siobhan. I am a marriage coach, and I work with women to help them create happier, more loving marriages, all without having to make over their husband. I know a lot of times we want to make him over, but that is not the key to our own personal happiness. If there's anything that will help improve our marriage quickly and effectively, it's by taking a good look in the mirror and looking at the things that we can begin to do within ourselves to improve ourselves, because our marriage is a function of what we do, what we think, what we say. And the more that we can look inward and change those things, then we'll see the results in our marriage automatically. So I am sharing 6 lessons learned that I have learned in my own 6 years of marriage, because yesterday my husband and I just celebrated our 6th wedding anniversary. And so I thought I would take this episode as the chance to just share with you a little bit about what I have learned and continue to learn and apply in my own life. So the first thing that I wanted to say was lesson number 1, and they're not in any particular order, except I think the last one is probably the most important. And the lesson number 1 was, when you don't keep your marriage a priority, everything else is harder. So a lot of times we put our marriage on the back burner because some other things seem more important. Work seems more important. Taking care of the kids seems more important. Doing all of the volunteer work and all of the other things that we're involved with seems more important. But what I found for myself personally, and I know that many other women struggle with this as well, is that when your marriage is not a priority, 1, you feel guilty about it because you know that it should be. And there's always a part of you that is sort of in the back of your head, sort of nagging like, man, you should really be having this conversation with your husband, or having this time with your husband, or going out and doing fun things together. Yet we give ourselves excuses, we give ourselves permission to put other things first. I know, especially as I've been building my business and promoting my book and doing all of the things that I've been doing professionally, that there have been times when my marriage has not come first. And as a relationship expert and a marriage coach, I feel incredibly guilty about that, because I pride myself on really walking the walk and talking the talk that I share with you all so much. And so in those moments where I know my marriage is not first, I feel incredibly guilty. And I also experience a little bit of resistance from my husband, which is I'm going to talk a little bit about in the next point. But, whenever you're not meeting the needs of your spouse, they get a little agitated about it, just as you do too. And so that comes across in a lot of different ways. But, you know, a lot of times when women feel like their husband isn't as helpful or isn't as accommodating or isn't as flexible to the things that are on their plate and the demands on their time and their attention, a lot of times that's because your marriage has fallen second. And, you know, he's sort of like, well, why should I help you do X, Y, and Z when you're not helping me, or you're not meeting my needs, or you're not giving me the attention that I want? I'm not saying that that's the most mature way to handle things, but it happens. And so a lot of times, one, we feel guilty when our marriage isn't first, and then you might experience a little bit of resistance from your spouse in terms of being as helpful and accommodating as you would like. Tanisha, good night. I don't know if that's good night, like good night, you're joining us, like good morning, but good night. I hope that's what you mean. Yes, good night, good evening, hello, thank you for joining me. And then there's also just a little bit of heaviness, again, because we know in our hearts that the marriage should come first, and when it doesn't, it's not aligned with our soul, and we feel heavy, we feel guilty, and we experience a little bit of resistance. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two requires, it says here that listening requires hearing the things that go unsaid. So I used to think that I was a great listener, that if someone complained about something, I could really identify that underlying need. You're joining. Yes, Tanisha, thank you for joining. Hey, Ebony, it's good to see you here too. And Janine, of course, great to see you. So when we listen to what goes unsaid, that's so important, because a lot of times men are not going to complain the way that we do. When we're upset about something, we let it be known. Men are not always that way. There are some men that will sort of express their needs very loud and very, very clearly, but sometimes they don't. And so I think one of the lessons that I had to really learn was that sometimes my husband is not going to complain. Sometimes he's not going to point out something that annoys him or frustrates him, but it's my job to tune into him and to observe and to study him and to listen for the things that go unsaid. And so I encourage you to do that as well, to really become a student of your spouse and to learn when they're happy, when they're unhappy, and to really examine yourself at the things that you may be doing that are contributing to your marriage moving in the right direction and your marriage moving in the wrong direction. So that was lesson number two. Listening requires hearing things that go unsaid, because he's not going to always say it. Lesson number three, which is really, really important for me this year in particular, was when you're feeling unloved, it's a sign to turn to God and to love yourself more. So many times we look for our spouses to fill our emotional needs. And yes, that is part of being a united couple. But a lot of times we look for them to fill that need because we don't want to do the work to do it ourselves. And a lot of time that means pressing into God more to experience the love and the fulfillment that can only come from your Creator. And a lot of times that involves tuning into yourself more and looking where you can be more kind and compassionate and loving towards yourself. We are so critical of ourselves. We strive for perfection in every area of our life. And when we don't meet it, we feel bad. We compare ourselves to other people. And then to fill that void that we're creating because of the negative thoughts we have about ourselves, we look to our spouse, we look to our husbands for that validation, for that affirmation, for that confirmation that we matter, that we're important, that we're beautiful. When if we would do the work ourselves to cultivate that within ourselves, when we would go to God and ask Him to fill that void, then we wouldn't have so much of a need for our spouse to do that, right? We want to be whole and complete within ourselves when we unite, when we're married, so that we can be whole and complete and even better together, right? Not needing the other person to complete us, but we come complete and whole ourselves. So that is another really important lesson that I learned this year. The fourth lesson that I want to share is that some seasons in your marriage are meant to be endured and require you to surrender, and not seasons where you have to force things to be fixed. So that's a little bit complicated. Let me say it again. Some seasons are meant to be endured and require you to surrender, and not forced to be fixed. So every marriage has their own bumps in the road. Mine is no different. We've definitely had our ups and our downs this year. And me, again, being a relationship expert and a marriage coach, I am all about action. I'm all about, you see a problem, you get some tools, you get the resources, you apply these skills that I teach, and then you fix it. Like, that's just how the equation should go. But I've learned this year in particular to surrender and to sometimes just endure, not endure where I'm sitting along passively watching things fall apart. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But every marriage has their rough seasons. And I think a lot of times what gets people into trouble and what makes things so difficult and what brings divorce to the conversation for some is that they don't see their role in that season to just endure it. They see their role as to get out of it. And sometimes you just have to endure. Sometimes you have to surrender and to look for the lesson that that particular challenge is trying to teach you. Learn that lesson, right? And then go on from there. But sometimes you just have the mindset of enduring and taking care of yourself, pressing into God again during that season, because He will carry you through it if you have the mindset to endure. Okay, so that was lesson number 4. Lesson number 5 was that self-care must include an emotional and spiritual component on a daily basis, like daily practices to take care of yourself emotionally and spiritually. So a lot of times when I ask women, what are your self-care practices? What do we hear? Oh, I go to the spa. I try to exercise. I go to get my nails done. And those things are fine. Like, I definitely recommend that. It should definitely be on your list. But I think a lot of times we don't see our emotional health as part of self-care. We don't see our spiritual health and spiritual connection to our Creator as part of our self-care regimen. First of all, those types of things are sometimes the easiest to implement. You can do them anywhere at any time, right? God is always available to you. You can always tune into yourself emotionally, and they don't require any money. One of the things that I have started to do, which I am so grateful that I have the discipline to do, is to have a morning ritual that involves, first, gratitude. Before I open my eyes in the morning, I thank God for 3 things I'm grateful for. Then I have a prayer and meditation app that I actually listen to on my phone every day. 15 minutes, centers me, grounds me for the day, and then I'm ready to go about my day. So that is both the spiritual and emotional practice that I practice daily. Now, if I get to exercising, great, that's fantastic. If I get to some of those other self-care items, wonderful. But I prioritize my emotional health and my spiritual health as part of my own personal self-care practice. Now, I have a friend that's a health coach. I'm sure she would like nudge me in the physical place. But I've learned about myself that I can't even find the motivation to exercise or to do some of those other physical health things until I'm well emotionally. And so that's what I've been focusing on for the past several months. And my mind is already in a better place to start doing some of those physical self-care practices as well. So that's just me personally. But for you, you have to find what's going to work for you. And I strongly encourage you to expand your definition of self-care. A lot of times we get into this one box of like, self-care looks like this for me. And if I can't go to the spa, if I can't get my massage, like, I'm not practicing self-care. Not true. You can practice self-care anytime, okay? And then the 6th, which I mentioned, is probably for me personally the most important. And if you've been following my live streams, reading my blog posts and emails and all of that stuff, you've heard me talk about this book so many times. It's called Sacred Marriage. And it asks the question, what if God designed marriage not to make us happy, but to make us holy? And the 6th lesson that I've learned that I continue to apply every single day is that marriage is designed to make you holy, not just happy. So that's my interpretation of it. And I believe that so often we look for marriage to make us happy. We look for our spouse to do certain things that bring us joy. We look for certain experiences in our marriage to uplift us and to make our lives better. And absolutely, there's a time and a place, and that should be a part of your healthy, happy marriage. At the same time, marriage is an experience that I consider a lifelong course in personal and spiritual development. That our spouses are mirrors to us. They reflect back to us all of those parts of ourselves that maybe we don't want to see, all of those parts of ourselves that we haven't worked on and grown in and, come to our highest level of success in. They point those out in subtle and not so subtle ways. And a lot of times some of the defensiveness we experience is because we aren't willing to look at ourselves in that way. But if we were able to look at marriage as an experience to stretch us to become more like God, more holy, more righteous, more of our soul and more of who God created us to be, then we would be looking for marriage to do so much more different things than what we look for when we expect it to make us happy. And so if your standard of a healthy marriage is how much more like God can I be in this marriage, then I think you have the right idea. And that is something that I am growing to be much more intentional about. What are the characteristics of God that I want to embody? How can I be less selfish? How can I be more patient? How can I be more compassionate and understanding? And how can I offer unconditional love even when my expectations aren't met, even when I'm disappointed, even when my husband doesn't respond the way that I want to? How can I forgive him as quickly as possible? Those are the marks, the signs of a holy marriage. And I think that's what God calls us to have. Yes, he wants us to be happy, but I believe that buried in all of those attributes of Christ is our true joy, is our true peace, our true fulfillment, and our true happiness. So those are the 6 lessons that I've learned in my 6 years of marriage that I just wanted to come on and share with you. I'll quickly recap them. Number 1, when you don't keep your marriage a priority, everything else is much harder. Number 2, listening requires hearing things that go unsaid. Number 3, when you're feeling unloved, it's a sign to turn to God and love yourself more. Number 4, some seasons are meant to be endured and require you to surrender rather than trying to force and fix everything. Number 5, self-care must include daily emotional and spiritual practices. And number 6, marriage is designed to make you holy, not just happy. So, I hope that this has been helpful. I know many of you are like, where is the Made Marriage Show? I will be back with you with my regular interviews, but I wanted to take this pause and just share with you my own reflections of my own marriage and the 6 lessons that I've learned in my 6 years as a married woman to my husband, as a happily married woman to my husband. Thank you so much for tuning in. I encourage you to share this broadcast, and I will be back with you real soon for the next episode of the Made Marriage Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful, wonderful week, and I'll be back with you soon. Bye.